As we begin tonight, I just want to share with you that this week's Torah portion is called Terumah. And in Terumah, Moses begins by collecting gifts and donations for everything that's going to go into the tabernacle. And one of the things that he's starting to collect donations for is something called the ephod, ephod, which was the breastplate that the high priest used to wear. And on the breastplate were different valuable jewels that had the names of all of the 12 tribes. And whenever Moses had a question of something, a case that he wasn't able to solve, he would ask God the question, and the different letters of the names on the breastplate of the tribes would light up. And this was the original first email system, and it's no secret that it was the Jews who are now leading the way in cyber technology. I'm not sure if you know, but as the Jews would travel in the wilderness and wherever the tabernacle would go, there would be the ananei hakavod, the clouds of glory that would follow them. And so all of the messages that the Jews were sending back and forth to God got stored in the cloud. And so tonight, this week's Torah portion is very fitting that we should welcome someone from cyber technology. But I'm going to allow the rest of the introductions for our host. But I want to tell you what a great honor it is to have Howard and Sharon Socol as members of our congregation, as members of our Temple Beth Israel committee, as leaders of Birthright Israel, which I remarked to Howard just the other day. I think that we are on the verge of having the first generation of American Jewish leaders who have all been to Israel because of the Birthright program. It'll be interesting to see the fruits that this will produce. They do a tremendous amount for Israel, for the Jewish community, and of course for Temple Beth Am. So it's a great honor tonight to introduce to you Howard and Sharon Socol.
Thank you, Rabbi Barras. That was an enlightening and fun introduction. I'm going to be just a minute because I want to get started on our excellent program. This is year 12. What a journey we've shared, all of which could not be accomplished without the support of Temple Beth Am. This includes Andrea Levine, who is willing and able to work to make our series successful. Janet Spaceman, who keeps smiling all the time. I keep asking her for the audience count, as well as other help with our program. Mindy Robin, who helped check you all in tonight. Neil Littauer, who always answers my call to tape and record and preserve our speakers. The clergy, who always support us, and all of you for your feedback and your welcoming attendance. Please use the cards that you've received for any questions, and Andrea will be walking around during the presentation to be collecting them. And then please stay for our dessert reception. Now, here's Howard to introduce our incredible speaker.
Let's see if this works here like that. How's that? First of all, thank you all for coming. I get the honor of introducing Nadav. Nadav and his wife Maya and their family, we feel, are part of our family. I need to speak louder.
Use the mic.
I needed to bring this up like this. Nadav is, let me first introduce Maya, his wife, Maya Zafrir. Obviously the more attractive one in the family. Nadav is speaking tonight, but he was actually our second choice. We did ask Maya, but she's been very, very busy. Maya is currently the Chief Marketing Officer for Bank Leumi in New York. So we're very happy that you're coming. Nadav and Maya both got their MBAs, where of course Maya's grades are much higher than Nadav's. And up until a few years ago, she was the major breadwinner in the family. All right, let's get to Nadav. Nadav has led a very interesting life. He was born in kibbutz Anavim near Jerusalem, but grew up in Ecuador. So Nadav speaks perfect Spanish. So after he gives his talk in English, he's going to repeat the whole talk in Spanish for you Spanish-speaking people. At 18, Nadav returned to Israel to enlist in the IDF. His 25-year Army career concluded as a Brigadier General and Commander of the Elite Technology Unit, Unit 8200. Nadav was the founder of IDF Cybersecurity Unit. I'm going to say that again. Nadav was the founder of the Cybersecurity Unit in the Israeli Defense Forces. And when Nadav was the commander of the 8200, there was this thing called the Sputnik virus. I don't know that much about it, but during that Sputnik virus, it kind of got into the Iranian nuclear program and delayed it for a number of years. Now, I don't know if Nadav was involved in that, and I'm not even sure if Israel was involved in that, but that happened during his time. Nadav retired from her cyber command to go out in the world and create a special company and make a few shekels. He and two of his IDF friends started Teammate, a cyber think tank and venture creator. Just as Nadav was very successful in his IDF career and also finding an amazing wife, he has been amazingly successful with Teammate in a mere 4 years. I will explain what success means with just 2 comments. Comment 1, you're as good as the company that you keep. Some of Teammate's strategic investors now are Microsoft, Cisco, AT&T, Intel, Airbus, Walmart, and Accenture, just to name a few. Comment 2, Teammate controls 6 companies. Teammate just announced that they sold 80% of their first company, Signia. Teammate invested $4.3 million in Signia and sold 80% of Signia for $200 million. Not a bad return. We should all have those type of returns. So I hope you get the idea that this Brigadier General, business leader, has had some exciting accomplishments. So with all that build-up, I bring to you Maya's husband, Nadav Zafrir.
So, first of all, I have to tell you that beyond AT&T and Walmart and Microsoft and Cisco, we also have Sharon Socol as our investor. So you also made a few shekels. Just so that you know. So first of all, it's great to be here and thanks so much for having me. Rabbi and Howard told me about the roster of speakers that came before me. And I think it only goes downhill from here. Howard, you presented it all well. I think we're good. Let's go have dessert. But actually, I want to tell you about a little bit about my background and a little bit about why I think Israel has been able to play way above its weight in the last couple of decades in terms of tech and a couple of other things, and my perspective of how this came to be. But before that, I want to start with telling you what I want to talk about. So I want to talk about brief history of humanity. That'll take the first 2 or 3 hours. Then I'll talk a little bit about the brief history of tech. Then I'll talk to you about the cyber state of affairs, and we'll take it from there. But let's get started. But before that, I want to start with a question. What is humanity's most important invention so far? Compound interest.
Air conditioning.
Sorry?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. What else?
Thermos bottle.
Thermos bottle. All right. Come on. So let me ask, I'll give you a parameter. What is the invention that had the biggest impact on prosperity in terms of human population? The wheel. Steam engines, getting close. Steam engine, which leads to electricity, right? So you're right. What's your name? Alan. And I think you have a grandson in 8200. See? So, if you think about prosperity in terms of human population, it is the steam engine and electricity. We sort of plateau in terms of human population until the turn of the 17th, 18th century when we get the steam engine. The steam engine and then electricity basically does something unbelievable, which is it unleashes energy. Until then, if we want to move something, we have to do it with our own muscles, and then the agrarian revolution, and we use animals to do it, but it's still very, very limited. The steam engine, electricity, unleashes the Industrial Revolution, of course, and you can see what happens in terms of human population. The only reason I want to put this up, by the way, this is not my idea. If you haven't read the book, it's called Sapiens. It's by Yuval Noah Harari. Really fascinating. And I found it super interesting. What I want to talk to you about is the last 20 years. So this is just for perspective. Over the last 20 years, what happened is quite remarkable in terms not of what happened, but how fast it happened. That is the acceleration of change itself. So if we look at a brief history of connectivity, connectivity is something that we take as a given. It's not a very old phenomenon, right? So somewhere around 2000, the world really gets connected. A few really important inventions that, by the way, were all the energy, the resources come from military, government, satellites, global positioning. The internet itself is researched in DARPA in the 60s and 70s. Packet switching, all that happens, post-World War II until 2000. Everything matures at the same time, and boom, we get connectivity. Then fast forward about 10 years back, it's hyperconnectivity. The biggest invention of 2007, of course, is what? It's the iPhone, right? It changes everything. Remember the days that this was a phone? It's not really a phone anymore. It's a computer in our pocket. It's a connectivity machine. It's a social machine, etc., etc. But the cloud, as the Rabbi said, and other inventions all come together, and we go to hyperconnectivity. And today, if you like, it's no longer just about connectivity. It's about cross-connectivity. Cross-connectivity, meaning it's the physical merging with the virtual. It's our bodies merging with the internet, with biotech and wearables, etc. And that's just one way to look at the world across the last 20 years. Of course, with every invention, there's the great opportunity that it unleashes in terms of how fabulous our lives are right now because of these inventions. But there's also a flip side. And the flip side is what the world now calls cyber, a little bit darker. So if we go back to the beginning of the century and think about connectivity, obviously there are makers and there are breakers. Right? So for every invention, for everything that will make us more prosperous, there's also the flip side of how we can use that, how criminals can use that, terrorists can use that, nation states can use that as a weapon, weaponize it and use it for whatever end they want to get to. So if you think about connectivity, how many of you have had your credit card hacked in the last couple of years? How many of you didn't have your credit cards hacked in the last couple of years? 8,200. There's a trend here. But So fraud is something that started as we became more connected. Of course, if you think about some of the stuff that happened around 2000, in this case 9/11, so what's 9/11? Is it a cyber attack? No, right? There's a moving physical object, kinetic, moving really fast into a stationary object and creating huge damage and changing the world. But if you look, and this is nothing I can prove, but if you look behind the scenes, my argument is that without this connectivity, we wouldn't have 9/11. Because this is a very complex operation. What do you need for an operation? Money, communication, command and control. There are about 200 to 400 operatives behind this operation, right? And they're preparing this operation for a couple of years, over 40 countries. They need to communicate. All of a sudden comes 2000 and they get access to state-of-the-art command and control that only 10, 20 years before that weren't available even to the most advanced militaries of the world, and they get it for free. And they're able to be under the current and nobody sees them, and we get 9/11. Then you fast forward to hyperconnectivity, you start seeing the attacks at scale. So how many of you have heard about the Target hack, Sony hack? These are the things that now it starts to happen at scale. If you look at what's happening at warfare, so Howard spoke about Stuxnet. Stuxnet, there is no, this is all in cyber, right? At the end of the day, there is a physical effect, but the whole operation is inside. By the way, there are other good things that happened when I was commander of 8200, and I'd like to take credit for all of them, but I cannot. For obvious reasons, including Stuxnet. So for the record, I don't know what Howard was talking about. But it is a novel phenomenon, right? That nation states, at least allegedly the U.S. in this case, are able to create physical damage without doing anything in the physical world. And then if you fast forward to where we are today, it doesn't even make sense anymore to speak about crime and warfare as two separate phenomena because everything is converging. Probably the cost, the cyber attack that cost more than any other cyber attack so far is NotPetya. Anybody hear of NotPetya? NotPetya is a pretty sophisticated attack. Took place a couple of years ago, 2017. It took down companies like Maersk and FedEx and Merck and Mondelez and Saint-Gobain and a few others, huge companies that just shut down. You think about Maersk. Maersk moves more than 1/3 of the goods in the world. Shipping company. How did this happen? Well, allegedly, the Russians decided to take out the Ukraine using cyber. And went after a small shop that did the software for the tax for most of the companies that work in the Ukraine, in Kiev. I don't remember the name of the company, but it's a small shop. They got in, they put some malware. Anybody that was using that tax software, which basically is more than 80% of the businesses in Kiev, got affected. And then it's a worm. It just shuts down all the computers in the company if they're not patched right. So this took place about 2017. So far, estimated cost is $10 billion. So far. So the malware or the exploit, the bad software that they used, originated, again allegedly, from the NSA. Somebody stole it from the NSA. Some group in Russia used it to attack the Ukraine. Anybody that was just an innocent bystander using this very available and predominantly the most used tax software, I don't know what the equivalent would be, like an Intuit or something like that, gets affected, and now you have ships that belong to MERS in the port in Los Angeles that can't go because they don't know where to go. So it all gets mixed up in this convergence between nation-state, non-nation-state, criminal, non-criminal, and going forward, unfortunately, I think that these kinds of attacks will be considered nothing. Because if we go back to electricity, this has been publicized by the Department of Homeland Defense, that the Russians have access to utilities, electricity in the U.S. And it's not a matter of can they do it, it's a matter of do they want to do it, that is turn off the lights. I mean, they've done it before. They've done it in 2015 and 2016. Guess where? In Ukraine. Right? Which, in many ways, is sort of a testing ground for Russian cyber capabilities. Now, if you think about electricity and where it's brought us, what do you think will happen if we shut down electricity, let's say New York City, for an hour? We will survive. 2 hours, 4, 24, things start deteriorating. So that's sort of the state of affairs of where we are. In many ways, the reason that this is such a big problem is that if we go back to the hyperconnectivity curve, until 2007, there was an equilibrium between offense and defense. So there was always this cat and mouse game, right? There's always makers and breakers. You go to World War II, probably the best spy story yet is the story of the Enigma, right? The Germans have the best encryption capability. The Allies break it. In this case, collaboration between the Poles and the Brits. They break the code, and maybe not very politically correct to say, but that's probably one of the reasons that we're sitting here now. Right? But there's always this cat and mouse game, and there's some kind of equilibrium. The problem is that when things got hyper-connected, the attack surface, that is the opportunities to find little breaks, little openings, just started to grow exponentially. And so the attack followed the hyperconnectivity, the offense that is, followed the hyperconnectivity curve, and the defense just remained behind. That's what it's all about. And so when you hear about this cyber phenomena, the problem is pretty much this, and it's sort of a built-in asymmetry. So I'll give you an example. We say that offense and defense, right? So if you're on the defense, you have to get it right 100% of the times. If you're on offense, you only have to get it right once. And so it's an asymmetric situation. And in asymmetric warfare, what do you know? If you're on the bad side of the asymmetry, usually you lose. And that's the reason that the world now is so concerned about cybersecurity, because it's become a big issue. In many ways, we thought about the great opportunities in connectivity, in hyperconnectivity, in cross-connectivity, but we didn't think about the bad things that can happen. We didn't design it to be resilient enough, and that's why we're in this fragile state of affairs right now. And don't get me wrong, the possibilities for prosperity because of hyperconnectivity, because of big data, because of machine learning, because of emerging artificial intelligence are unbelievable. And if you think you've seen anything about the pace of change, we'll embrace, because it's going to go much faster. Problem is the flip side. So that's just my story about hyperconnectivity and the flip side. With that, I want to switch to something completely different, which is talk about asymmetry in Israel. So, if you haven't seen the map for a while, we're a small country in the Middle East. And the reason that I like this map is that the blue represents predominantly Muslim populations. And the red in this case, predominantly Jewish population. And there are people in real estate here, they say that location is everything, right? This is not the greatest location for the only Jewish nation in the world, but where's the rabbi? You know? It was decided a long time ago. But this is an asymmetric situation, and so the question is, how do you deal with asymmetry? I think I'll give you, so forget about cyber technology for a second. I want to give you sort of a 101 to Israeli defense philosophy. And think about Israeli defense philosophy in the 20th century, not in the 21st century. So in the 20th century, it's quite simple. We are in an asymmetric situation. We are few, there are many. We have a small piece of land, they have a big, we have limited resources, they have a lot of resources. And you measure power in the 20th century by counting. How many soldiers, how many tanks, how many kilometers or acres, how many fighter jets, infantry, air force, etc. Right? And we're in an asymmetric situation. When, you know, now we're quite large compared to what we were in the beginning. We're about 500,000, and we have to deal with a much larger population. How do you deal with that? Well, three basic concepts, very, very simple. Concept number one is early warning. All right, that is, you have to have really good intelligence. Concept number two is decisive victory. That is, if war breaks out, you have to do it really fast because you don't have the resources. And concept number three is deterrence. That is, once it does happen, let's kick their butt like really hard so they don't want to do it again. And in the 20th century, you can see that it does take about a decade between the big conflicts. Now, in order to do that, you need to have some kind of force, and here's where asymmetry breaks in another way. So we said, or Israel said, we'll have mandatory service. What does mandatory service mean? Very, very simple. Everybody serves. You finish high school, you go directly into the military. Now, but what do you do during those 3 years of mandatory service? Anyone?
Train.
You get trained for what?
To fight.
To become a reservist. Because in the next 20 to 30 years, you're still going to be a part of the military as a reservist, and that allows us to grow very, very fast by pulling in the reserves in times of crisis. And so you've got a very small army or military based on mandatory service, but in times of crisis, when needed, you can grow it very, very fast. It has to happen between 12 to 72 hours, literally. Delivered like a blowfish, right? So what happens is, if you know that something bad is going to happen, you mobilize the reserves. They see that you probably know that they're going to do something bad, or that they're planning an attack, a surprise attack. And, well, by the sheer fact that they see that you know, maybe that will thwart the attack in itself, and if not, you can protect yourself. Right? When did it not work very well? 1973, of course. Right? Yom Kippur, 1973, Saturday, Shabbat. I think it's 2 o'clock. The sirens go off. Probably the biggest trauma of modern Israel. By the way, my first memory. I was 3 years old. The sirens go off. My father goes to get his uniform. My mother grabs us and runs to the shelter outside. Pretty traumatic. So the thing is that in order to know when to call the reserves, what do you need? You need warning. And in order to get warning, what do you need? Intelligence, right? Because otherwise it's cry wolf. It's not so good. And this is where 8200 comes into our story. So 8200 is very important to Israeli defense because it does 2 out of the 3 parts of what it means to have intelligence in a modern in a modern world. So 101 to intelligence, you need to get the information, you need to process the information, and you need to create research based on the information that you've processed. 80-200 does the first two, that is get the information, process the information. Okay? Now, when you say get the information, what does that mean? Basically means that you have to get into the IT infrastructure of the enemy. This is signal intelligence. There are other forms of intelligence, like human intelligence, imagery, but probably 80+% of the really important intelligence comes from signal intelligence in today's cyber. And so you need to get into somebody's IT infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, in the 20th century, that meant that we had to have what I like to call technological superiority. Superiority, of course, means that you have to be much better than somebody else. In this case, we had to be much better than our neighbors. Right? Remember the map? So, we need to be better than the engineers in Cairo, or in Beirut, or in Damascus, etc. It's not easy, but it's possible. And we were better, and we had better intel. We had the superiority. We had the intelligence superiority, so we could protect ourselves. But remember this: something happened around the end of the 90s or the beginning of the 90s. All of a sudden, all these super connectivity technologies started to become ubiquitous and accessible, not only to rich nations, but to everyone. So now, all of a sudden, it becomes much harder because now it's not enough to be better than our friends and neighbors surrounding us. Now, all of a sudden, you have to be better than the engineers in Seattle, from Microsoft, or China, from Huawei, or Nokia, that used to create cellular phones in Finland. That's much harder. And what 80-100 did is quite remarkable, in my opinion. Again, I'd love to take credit for it, but I was not there at the time when they decided to do this. What they decided to do is, you know what? We have mandatory service. What if we use mandatory service in a new way? Instead of hiring our engineers from universities, what if we start recruiting directly from high schools? And instead of sending people to universities to spend a few years in school and then get an internship and then get some experience and then go out and do the really cool technical stuff that they need to do, what if we can hire directly or recruit directly out of high school? And so the whole system started to change. Two things needed to change, by the way. First of all, 80-100 needed to get access to 100% of the population when they're still in high school so that they could screen them. And another thing needed to happen, which was pretty controversial at the time, and still is a little bit controversial, and that is first pick. Before special ops, infantry, pilots, anything, first pick. But because the government understood that this is so crucial to our defense, they said yes, and the whole system started to change. And that means that this is the process still today. That 80-100 starts screening individuals, very young individuals, usually at 15 to 16 years of age, boys and girls, when they're still in high school. Now, how many of you have kids in high school? Grandkids in high school? How much do they know when they're 15 or 16? Not a lot. So the whole process is not about asking them what they know or trying to realize what they know, but actually trying to predict what they can learn extremely fast. That is, what is their aptitude to learn technology, languages, whatever it is, extremely fast, because you're going to get them for 3 to 5 years, mandatory, then they leave. So you have to condense the learning portion to a maximum of 6 months to make this at least reasonably cost effective. What struck me when I arrived to 8200 was that it actually works. You can take somebody directly out of high school, let's say an 18-year-old girl directly out of high school with zero Arabic, for example, and 6 months later she's fluent in Arabic and she's in the front line sitting there listening, making the most important decisions on intelligence, which is what's garbage and what's important. And the same thing goes for computer languages and mathematics, etc. That is, you choose the top 1% based on their aptitude. You create a very, very focused training program for them. You make them learn about 18 hours every day. You test them every 48 hours. You put them in an extremely competitive environment. After those 6 months, you put them in diverse groups. You give them extremely hard problems. Sometimes problems that you think that are almost impossible, if not impossible, to solve. And magic happens. And that's what 8200 is all about. And that's how 8200 has been able to stay ahead of the curve in terms of tech. And it's really a phenomenal, it's a phenomenon that's, I think, pretty interesting. I know that Dan Sr. Was here a couple of years ago, 3 years ago?
Yes.
A while back. So Dan wrote his book with his co-author, trying to remember his name. It'll come back to me in a second. Maya, you can Google it. And when I retired from 8200, he said, you know, we got to have lunch. I really need to talk to you. I said, you know, what do you want to talk about? He says, listen, we got to talk about something. And I said, all right. So we met for lunch. And what he told me, I thought was very, very interesting. He said, you know what 8200 is cracked? I said, yeah, you know, we're really good. What's the name? Soul Singer, sorry. So Soul Singer and Dan Senior wrote the book together. Soul is in Israel. And he said, you know, 8200 has cracked something which is really, really phenomenal. I said, yeah, of course, we're the best in cyber and intel. You know, we're the coolest geeks in the world. And he said, no, you don't understand. You've cracked something much more important, and that is the skill shortage, which is going to be the biggest shortage humanity is going to face in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Why? Because of the pace of change, you send kids to university, by the time they are in their 4th year in computer science, what they learned in their 1st year has already become obsolete. And 8200 has created this mechanism, which is pretty great. Now, this was really, really interesting. The effect of this is also quite interesting. And no, I don't think anybody thought about it. Again, I would love to take credit for it, Howard. This, if we could take credit for, we'd really be rich. But these people come out. There's a 30% churn inherent to the system. They come out at 23, 24, 25, 26. And they're empowered. They feel like they can, you know, they can just gobble the world. They're already experienced entrepreneurs in their mid-20s. And they've already had responsibilities that people usually 20, 30, 40 years older than them haven't had at that age. And they become the pulse of what we call the cyber nation. Because in many ways, 8200 has really become the best tech school on the planet. And again, we never planned for it. And this is something I'm super proud of. Not only because, you know, if you think about it, the mandatory service piece should have been a tremendous burden on the economy. But in many, many ways, it's become the sort of the engine of the tech ecosystem in Israel, which is pretty much what's going for our economy right now in Israel. And what's going for our economy in Israel is quite impressive. Not only if you look at it as a per capita, but some of these stats here are absolute numbers. Sorry. Second foreign country with listings on NASDAQ. Right? Before China, before Canada, before there's more tech VC venture capital money in Israel than in all of Europe combined. 2019, I don't know what that means, but voted or listed 8th most powerful country in the world. Remember, we're 0.1% of the world's population. They're talking about punching above your weight. Pretty big punchers. And it's getting, and honestly, which is also quite remarkable, it's getting more and more powerful because there's a virtuous cycle to it. So, the entrepreneurs of 2 decades ago left to the Silicon Valley. They grew their companies, they sold it, they came back to Israel. Now they're second-timers and third-timers, and all of a sudden we're getting not just these tech little companies of sub $10 million, but actually big companies that have a real impact on the world. And in many, many ways, I think this is at least one of the pillars of why we play way above our weight in tech, and why I'm super optimistic about the Israeli economy, and more than that, the Israeli resilience altogether because of this phenomenon, because of this virtuous cycle. Of course, we have a lot of problems, but this is really cool and getting stronger, better, and more powerful. There are other pillars, by the way, of why we play above our weight, but this is sort of where I come from, and I think it's one of the most important ones. By the way, people think about 80 to 100. When they say 80 to 100, it's not only 80 to 100. There are other important units in the IDF and other places. And so we spoke a little bit about human history and about tech history and about defending Israel and how that made it a superpower in tech. All good so far?
Yeah.
How much more time do I have? Not much. 5 minutes? 10 minutes. All right. So in 10 minutes, I want to tell you what we're doing today at Teammate. And in many ways, we're leveraging all of this because if you think about what's happening in the world right now, and I started with that, we are really in dire times in terms of the world's fragility. Some of these attacks, I spoke about NotPetya. How many of you have star something in Marriott? Star whatever? Platinum something, right? Well, somebody has your credentials. You know that, right? They're in the dark web. Are you worried about it? You're not worried about it. Okay. I'm just saying. The biggest problem, in my opinion, has nothing to do with your credentials. The biggest problem is trust. Because if we lose trust in our financial systems, for example, well, I mean, what's a bank, right? It's a trust system. If we lose trust in utilities, if we lose trust in voting systems, democracies, because of fake news, then everything that makes up us as a modern civilization can very, very quickly deteriorate. And so I think you should be worried. And I think we haven't seen much yet because attackers are very, very, I would say, they have really cool ideas. How many of you drive Teslas? Right, so what's a Tesla, by the way? A Tesla is basically a really cool computer, right? That happens to be on wheels. So, attackers like to mix and match. So, think about ransomware, but on your car. So if you get an email saying, we just hacked your MasterCard, pay us a few $1,000s in Bitcoin, or else, maybe you're not really worried. There's insurance. You wake up in the morning, you get into your Tesla, and it says, pay me $3,000 or you're not going to work. You get an Uber. And if you're driving down the highway, and now you get this message, you pay. How many of you have Bitcoin accounts, by the way? Not many. Get a Bitcoin account. It comes handy because attackers don't like they like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. by the way. If you're leaders in enterprise, I'm not joking. There should be somebody in your enterprise that has a Bitcoin account and knows how to negotiate with cyber criminals. I'm truly not joking. So what do we do in last 5 minutes at Teammate? We basically said, you know, that the world is in many ways broken. And we think we have a couple of unfair advantages. And we can leverage our understanding of the world to build companies that really make an impact because we have access to super talent and because we have cool perspectives. And so that's what we do. We build a platform, we build a village around it, we added talent to that platform, we created a process, and we tried to give a holistic offering. So Howard was speaking about the investors. The investors were really picked carefully because we thought in order to really understand the problems, it's not enough just to sit, you know, those the cool movies about how all these cool technologies and companies start. Somebody's sitting in their garage and they're sitting in their basement and they're having pizza and they're thinking about cool ideas. We thought that's great, but not enough. You really need to have a holistic perspective of the world if you want to solve big problems. And so that's why we took money from strategic investors rather than financial investors. Howard being one of our strategic investors. And I can tell you later about his strategic input to the company. It won't take long. I was just repeating what he was saying. So the idea for us was, instead of solving problems, or instead of creating technologies and then trying to understand what the problems are, let's flip it on its head. Let's go out there and hunt for problems, for big problems. Travel the world and hunt for big problems. Create a very, very sophisticated, diverse research group. Guess where we bring the researchers from? 8,200. So we said, you know, if 8,200 takes 1% of the population every year, they put them through this process and then they come out, where does the top 1% go every year? Why don't we take it? Create unique critical mass of talent so that we can now start looking at big problems. And that's what we've been doing in the last few years. And actually, Howard, 8 companies already. And each one of them does something else, but together they have a pretty holistic solution to the world. I'll tell you about just 2 things that we do just to give you a glimpse, and then I'll shut up and take a few questions. So, but there is one silver lining between the companies, and that is we started with saying security, right? We need to secure the world. But then we said, you know, it's not enough to secure the world because the resources are limited, and so we need to secure the world in a cost-effective way. And that's what we're trying to do with the companies that we're building. And our philosophy, remember, asymmetry is to take the attackers out of band. That is, we're not going to defend where it's convenient for the attackers, but rather we're going to create the defense where we have the superiority as defense and not the attackers, not the offense. And lately we said, you know what, it's not enough to think about how we avoid the world's worst nightmares, which is most of what cybersecurity companies do, but what if we can actually be there when they want to fulfill their dreams? That is, how do you create cyber as an enabler? As an enabler to what? For the most part, very simply put, as an enabler to connect between big data, huge data, like genomic data, with really, really advanced machine learning algorithms that are becoming artificial intelligence. If you can mix and match them, you can really come up with some real prosperity for humanity, like cure cancer, or create clean mobility, etc. And so that's the way we see our journey. I'll stop. So this will be my last slide. We started with going after attackers in different ways, and we built different companies that do it in very different ways. The last thing that we're working on is very, very complicated to explain. it's so complicated that I can't explain it because I don't get it, really. But it really blows my mind to think about the possibilities of this. And so we became more ambitious. It's not only about security, it's about enabling prosperity. And this is the last thing we're working on. It's called homomorphic encryption. Look it up later. It's really, really cool. What does homomorphic encryption allow you to do? It allows you to take data, encrypt it, that is, make it very, very secretive, but still allow other people to use algorithms to make calculations on encrypted data. So I'll give you one use case, and that will be it. One of the biggest problems with cancer research is data, because if I go, how many of you have done your genomic sequencing with 23andMe or something like that? Great. What if I tell you that if you give me your data, I will give you a prescription of how you should live your life specifically for you, because you're the only one of a kind, and I can also help you avoid disease in the future. Now, give me your genomic data. How many of you will give me your genomic data? Not many. Why not? I'm a good guy, trustworthy, and I have a really good machine learning capability that will help you live your good stuff. But the obvious part is that you have to trust me to do that. And there's also regulation, in this case HIPAA regulation. And so there's a lot of data, there's a lot of algorithms looking for that data. They'll never mix and match because of trust. And these are the kinds of technologies that can promote this trust. And that's the kind of stuff that we're working on right now, like transcending fundamental technologies to enable research, trust, and so on and so forth. So that's what I wanted to tell you.
What keeps you up at night, besides your son?
I have a 1-year-old son. His name is Adam. So that keeps me up at night. Honestly, I sleep pretty well. What keeps me up at night in terms of cybersecurity is the complexity of the problem. It's a really complex problem. And in order to solve it, it's a team sport. You need many players, and it's very, very hard to get these players to play together. And if you think bureaucracy is bad, bureaucracy at its best is probably not good enough to come up with a new cyber solution. Because what is bureaucracy? It's let's learn from the past, get best practices, create laws and regulations. The problem with cyber is it moves so fast, by the time something becomes a best practice, it's obsolete.
Can you come to my house and fix my computer?
Yes, but I will bring Maya with me, because I could not do it if my life depended on it.
Instead of losing Israelis' best and brightest in 3 to 5 years of mandatory service, does Israel offer them salaries and other incentives to be competitive with private industry?
The answer is yes and no. That is, you cannot compete with the private industry, especially not when Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Google all have their headhunters sitting in Tel Aviv and literally, truly have somebody sitting at the entrance to 8200 trying to grab them as they come out and offer them about 100x of what they would be making. The only way you can have them stay is by offering them a challenge and a sense of purpose. So challenge, sense of purpose, and the fact that they've never been out, so they don't know what it's like, is what you can offer them. But, and this is an important one, I don't think it should change dramatically, because 8200 is very inefficient. Because an organization that has a 30% churn inherently, and that spends an immense amount of resources on training, is not very efficient, but it's extremely effective. And so the fact that you have that evergreen talent and passion and naivete coming out of high schools all the time is what keeps it going.
What do you think about Alexa and Google Dot?
I use them. They're very convenient. Just like with everything else, many of you used Waze to get here? If I told you that there's a Google God that's overlooking you all the time and knows exactly where you are, would you still use Waze? The answer is yes, right? Because it's convenient. And so is Alexa. The trick is to balance between connectivity and convenience and prosperity and security. And it's not impossible. So my answer is yes, I like it. No, I don't think that I would have the mic open all the time.
How do you protect your security programs from getting into the wrong hands when you seek to maximize profits?
So, two parts to the answer. The first one is very, very simple. We decided when we started this journey that we will never do anything that's cyber offense. That is, we don't have any surveillance, intel, business intel, and other acronyms for what people do. We only do defense. That's number one. The other is we're very particular in who we sell to. That is why most of our market is in the US. And finally, I think that we're not as good as you think. That is, if somebody really wants to get in, they will.
Well, that's scary. What are you most excited about as far as the state of Israel?
Look, I think that we are really at a point where this virtuous cycle is becoming so powerful that in many areas we have a really big impact. And the fact that the world moves faster and faster, the fact that tech and innovation and disruption is becoming so central to everything that has to do with human prosperity, it just so happens that our culture, our forte, we're just very well aligned into it. And so I think we can take a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger part in the pie. Look, in cyber specifically, we are already about 20% of the global market. This market is supposed to grow to about 150 billion in the next 5 years. So I'm very optimistic with regards to what we can do in Israel. You know, this is it's been a long night, and I don't want to keep you too long, and so we have a lot of problems as well. But that balances it.
All Jews have problems.
That is true.
That's
Many problems.
Rabbi could talk about that. How would you like to have some dessert and coffee?
I would love